Most people believe their life is shaped mainly by their goals, their discipline, or their motivation. But decades of behavioral science tell a more uncomfortable story. Large social network studies from Harvard researchers Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler found that behaviors like obesity, smoking, and even happiness don't just occur randomly, they spread through social networks. In other words, the people around you quietly influence the habits you adopt. Classic conformity research by psychologist Solomon Asch also showed that humans will often adjust their behavior and judgment simply to match the group, even when the group is clearly wrong. And more recent work in emotional contagion and social neuroscience shows that our stress levels, mood, and even physiological responses can sync with the people we spend time with. So this isn't motivational fluff. There is now strong scientific evidence that your social environment is one of the most powerful and most overlooked forces shaping the trajectory of your life. In this video, we'll break down exactly how this happens and what to watch for in your own circle. One of the strongest findings in behavioral science is something called social contagion. Put simply, human behaviors don't just occur in isolation, they tend to spread through social networks. Large longitudinal studies by Harvard researchers Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler analyzed data from the Framingham Heart Study, which tracked thousands of people and their social connections over several decades. What they found was striking. Behaviors like obesity, smoking, and even happiness tended to cluster within friend groups and social circles. In fact, individuals were significantly more likely to become obese if a close friend became obese, even when controlling for factors like geography and shared environment. But this effect goes well beyond physical health habits. Research in social learning and emotional contagion shows that humans also pick up communication styles, emotional responses, and even patterns of conflict from the people around them. Over time, we begin to mirror what we are repeatedly exposed to. If your close circle tends to handle stress calmly, communicate directly, and resolve disagreements respectfully, those patterns start to feel normal, and you're more likely to adopt them yourself. But the reverse is also true. If sarcasm, poor communication, constant complaining, or reactive conflict becomes the norm in your environment, those behaviors can quietly become part of your own default responses. And most of this happens below conscious awareness. As social humans, we naturally model the behaviors we see regularly. Our perception of what is normal subtly shifts to match the people around us. Over time, small exposures compound. If your close circle trains regularly, eats well, and values discipline, your own baseline behavior tends to move in that direction. But if your environment normalizes unhealthy habits, physically or emotionally, those patterns can slowly take hold. So when we talk about personal discipline, it's important to recognize this. Your habits, your reactions, and even your communication patterns are not formed in a vacuum. They are continuously shaped, often invisibly, by the people you spend the most time with. But the influence of your circle doesn't stop at the habits you pick up. Over time, the people around you begin to shape something deeper, your sense of what is normal. In social psychology, this is often explained through normative social influence. Classic research by Solomon Asch demonstrated that humans have a strong tendency to adjust their judgments and behavior to align with the group, even when no one explicitly tells them to. And in everyday life, this process is usually subtle. Your brain is constantly taking in social information and quietly recalibrating what feels typical, acceptable, and expected. This is how standards begin to drift. In one environment, showing up on time, training consistently, and communicating directly might feel like the baseline. In another, where complaining is common, effort is inconsistent, or accountability is low, a very different baseline can take hold. Importantly, this shift rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It tends to happen gradually through repeated exposure. Over time, behaviors and attitudes that once stood out start to feel normal, and the overall standard of the group becomes your internal reference point. Which is why your environment doesn't just influence what you do, it quietly influences what you tolerate, what you expect, and what you consider normal. But there's another layer to social influence that happens much faster and often much more viscerally. Psychologists refer to this as emotional contagion. Humans are highly sensitive to the emotional states of the people around them. Through subtle cues like facial expression, tone of voice, posture, and even breathing patterns, our nervous systems are constantly scanning the social environment. And importantly, our bodies don't just observe these signals, they begin to mirror them. Research in affective science and social neuroscience shows that people in close interaction can experience measurable synchronization in physiological responses, including changes in heart rate, stress activation, and emotional state. This is why some environments feel immediately calming, while others feel tense the moment you walk in. You might notice it in everyday situations. Spending time with someone who is consistently anxious or reactive can leave your own body feeling more on edge, even if nothing directly stressful has happened. On the other hand, being around someone who is grounded, regulated, and emotionally steady often has the opposite effect. Your shoulders drop, your breathing slows, your system settles. Over time, repeated exposure to these emotional climates can meaningfully influence your baseline stress levels, mood stability, and overall sense of well-being, which is why the impact of your social environment isn't just behavioral. It's physiological. Your nervous system is constantly listening to the people around you, whether you realize it or not. But the influence of your social circle goes even deeper than behavior or mood. Over time, the groups you belong to help stabilize your sense of identity, your internal answer to the question, what kind of person am I? Social psychologists describe this through social identity theory. Part of our self-concept is built from the groups we belong to, our friends, family, workplaces, and communities. And once an identity becomes established within a group, it tends to become self-reinforcing. Each social circle carries a set of implicit roles and expectations. Over time, people often get subtly cast as the responsible one, the funny one, the hothead, the one who never sticks to things. Importantly, this process is rarely explicit, but repeated feedback through jokes, comments, and everyday interactions can quietly lock these roles in place. Research on expectancy effects and self-fulfilling prophecies shows that people often begin to behave in ways that align with how they are consistently seen by others, which means your environment is not just observing who you are, it is continuously reflecting a version of you back to yourself. And this is where change can become socially uncomfortable. When someone starts shifting, becoming more disciplined, setting firmer boundaries, or pursuing new goals, it can create subtle friction in established relationships. Not necessarily because others are trying to hold them back, but because groups naturally tend toward stability. The familiar version of you is predictable. Growth introduces uncertainty. Over long periods of time, this identity-level reinforcement can either support meaningful progress or quietly anchor someone to an outdated version of themselves. And most of this happens without anyone consciously intending it. So, what do you actually do with this information? A useful starting point is a simple social audit, and one of the most common blind spots is family. In many cultures, family relationships are given an automatic pass. But from a behavioral and psychological standpoint, shared DNA does not automatically mean shared values, healthy dynamics, or supportive intent. Most families are loving and protective, but not all are. Around the world, there are well-documented cases of parents whose unmanaged anger, substance use, or volatility creates real harm inside the home. In those situations, we don't say, "That's just dad or mom, they're family." We recognize the risk and we draw a line. Now, most situations are not that extreme. Between a consistently supportive family member and a clearly harmful one, there are many shades of gray, and this is where a calm, honest self-audit becomes useful. Instead of asking, "Are they family?" a more practical question is, "How do I typically function after repeated time in this environment? Does this relationship support the direction I'm trying to grow in, or quietly work against it?" If you do notice friction, the goal isn't dramatic cutoffs. In most cases, small, deliberate adjustments are more effective and more sustainable. That might look like meeting in neutral, public settings rather than highly charged environments, keeping catch-ups time-limited instead of open-ended, being intentional about how often and how long you're exposed to draining dynamics. It can also help to maintain strong, healthy allies, people who understand your direction and provide stability, particularly in situations where triangulation or mixed messaging tends to occur in families. Over time, these quiet boundary adjustments often reduce unnecessary strain while preserving workable relationships where possible. Because ultimately, protecting your growth, your mental stability, and your immediate family environment isn't about punishment. It's about intelligent exposure management, applied consistently and applied to everyone, friends or family. Before we close, I'm curious about your experience. Have you ever noticed your environment pulling you forward or quietly holding you in place? What strategies have you found helpful when navigating difficult family or social dynamics? If you're comfortable sharing, drop your experience in the comments. It may help someone else who's working through the same thing. And if this video gave you something useful to think about, I hope it helps you move through these situations with a bit more clarity and confidence. Because no matter your background or culture, these can be difficult waters to navigate. But with awareness and steady, thoughtful adjustments, most people find that both their environment and their overall quality of life begin to improve.